Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today to discuss a very important topic, which is the ACFE report to the nation that's just published this month. It's Occupational Fraud 2024, where we are going to take an overview of all the types of fraud that are happening and what's going on all over the world related to fraud, corruption, asset misappropriation, and financial statement fraud. Now, when we are speaking about fraud, we need to understand how much fraud is costing organizations money and effort. And ACFE, based on so many reports to the nation they publish over the last 13 years, we can see that 5% of your revenue is accounting related to fraud. So if we think about the global GDP that happened in 2023, it's around 105 trillion. We can account around 5 trillion out of it is related to fraud. And when we are speaking about fraud, we are speaking about different types of fraud that can happen inside your organization, from corruption, asset misappropriation, money laundering, healthcare fraud, insurance fraud, different types of fraud. But occupational fraud is actually the most dangerous kind of fraud that's happening inside our organization. So when we are speaking about fraud and we want to understand the classification of fraud, we can see fraud is different. We have corruption, which is under corruption, we have different categories of fraud. It can be related to conflict of interest, it can be related to bribery, it can be related to economic extortion, or it can be related to illegal gratuity. Also, when we are speaking about fraud, fraud is classified not only as corruption, also classified as asset misappropriation. So it can be someone stealing the cash or the inventory from your organization. Or it can be fraudulent financial statement. When we speak about fraudulent financial statement, we can see under fraudulent financial statement, we have different type of categories. It can be related to manipulation of financial reporting, related to overstating your assets, or understating your liability and expenses. It can be manipulation of the valuation of inventory and account receivable, or manipulation in the disclosures inside your financial statement. So today, our discussion is about what are the types of fraud that are happening inside our organization related to corruption, asset misappropriation, and financial statement fraud. Now, when we look at them, we need to understand which one is most common, which one is happening every day. And we can see based on the ACFE report to the nation, it's, asset misappropriation is the most common, most frequent one. But which one it will have the maximum impact? Actually, financial statement will have the maximum impact. Usually when financial statement fraud will happen, will have maximum impact. Some cases related to financial statement fraud accounting for billions. So we should always be concerned about asset misappropriation, but at the same time, we need to make sure that financial statement fraud will not happen. Now, when we look at which types of fraud is happening together, we can see that in so many cases, around 37% of the cases that here, we have around 2 types of fraud happening at the same time. We have corruption and asset misappropriation. We have financial statement fraud and corruption. But we noticed something very interesting in the report, that related to financial statement fraud, only 1% of the cases are involved only financial statement fraud. The meaning for it, for you as a fraud examiner, if you uncover case related to financial statement fraud, most likely is going to be involved another type of fraud. It can be asset misappropriation, it can be corruption. So most of the time, fraud is not happening as one case, it will be multiple cases. And this is why from your perspective as a fraud examiner, you need in that case to document the case as 2 cases, because maybe we are going to take corruption case against a person and asset misappropriation at the same time. So there are 2 different cases. Now, when we look at the different types of fraud that are happening inside the organization, we need to understand based on the impact and likelihood. So the impact will show us exactly how much the damage that's going to happen to our organization in case the fraud happened, and related to the likelihood, what is the chances of this fraud happening. We can see based on this report that actually billing is represent one of the most frequent one, compared to check a payment tampering considered a very high impact. Both of them is considered high risk. And we can see the least significant one is registered disbursement. It's the least significant risk from impact standpoint and from likelihood. So always when we need to look at our organization, we need to do what we call the fraud risk assessment, to assess in our organization, in our operation, which type of fraud is happening and which one have the highest impact and the highest likelihood to be able to deal with the fraud that's high to medium to reduce it to the acceptable level. Now, when we are speaking about the frauds happening inside the organization, we need to understand how often we will be able to catch this fraud. Why? When we are speaking about the duration of fraud, they discovered the longer the fraud happened inside our organization, you can see here, the longer the fraud happened, the more the impact. So you can see most of the cases we catch them at early stage. But the longer the fraud happen, the highest the impact that we have. So organizations, they need to be able to catch fraud at early stages. And based on the research, they discovered the best way for you to catch fraud at early stages is by what? Is by implementing controls. Implementing the proper controls will reduce the cases of fraud happening by catching fraud at early stages, and that by itself will reduce the kind of impact that this fraud will have on our organization. So the best way to be able to catch fraud early and reduce the impact is to have the proper internal control in place. Now, when we are speaking about the types of fraud that's happening, we need to understand from our perspective as a fraud examiner, as auditors, as compliance professionals, what kind of schemes fraudsters are doing. So we can see here, usually they create fraudulent physical documents, or they alter documents, or they create electronic documents, or they alter documents, or they destroy documents. Most of the type of fraud that can happen inside our organization, it's based on three concepts. We can create a document, we can modify a document, or we can destroy a document, or we can access our accounting system, our account receivable, our inventory system, and we can modify the numbers inside. So having a proper control over our IT system to ensure no one can create or modify or manipulate, or having what we call log access and audit trail will be able to help us uncover these fraudsters and help us understand exactly what are the types of fraud they are doing based on looking at their activity inside our system. Now, when we look at cryptocurrency, cryptocurrency is a very important concept. Why? Today, most of the fraudsters, when they are doing fraud, they are actually using cryptocurrency for them to be able to do many things. One of them is what? They will convert their stolen assets to cryptocurrency, or they can use cryptocurrency to pay bribes, or they can use cryptocurrency to misappropriate the organization assets, or they misappropriate how much cryptocurrency reported on the financial statement. So we can see cryptocurrency is considered today a way for fraudsters to commit fraud, or to hide their money that came from fraud, or to manipulate their financial reporting. So this is one of the things that we need to look at it when we are conducting fraud examinations. Did the fraudsters use the cryptocurrency in their schemes? And how can we track back to be able to recover our assets in case they converted the assets that they stole from our organization into cryptocurrency? Now, when we look at how can we catch fraud, what are the best way for organization to be able to uncover fraud? They discover, based on the ACFE report to the nation that published in so many years, that the best way to catch fraud is actually TIP, the meaning whistleblower line. Hotline is considered by far the most effective way for our employees, our vendors, our customers to come forward and report that there are cases related to fraud. After that, we can see internal audit, we can see management review, we can see document examination, and sometimes by accident, someone was doing a work and he discovered that there is a fraud happening. But we should not leave it for accident, for 5%. We should make sure that we have effective hotline for us to report cases related to fraud. And this line should be implemented effectively inside the organization to allow who? To allow everyone inside the organization to report. Because we need to understand that so many staff in our organization, they are afraid when they are thinking about reporting the cases of fraud to the whistleblowing line, what they are doing? They are reporting the fraud to maybe not to the direct line, maybe they are reporting it to their supervisors. And we discovered that most of the staff inside our organization, they are reporting to the whistleblowing line. They say 52% of the cases reported is coming from our employees, from our staff who are working inside our organization. Some of it coming from our customers and some of it coming from our vendor. But the question here, when we see what is the best method for them to report the fraud, we need to go back to our culture inside our organization. Which one is the best method? Is it by an online form, or is it by email, or is it by phone? We need to go and speak with our HR, speak with our compliance, and say what are the most effective method for us to allow them to report in a way that will protect them and will allow them, if they don't want to reveal their identity, they will be anonymous, but at the same time, they provide us enough information, enough evidence, enough details for us to be able to carry out this information they report. So it's very important for us to understand exactly the most effective method. And they discover in so many organizations, mainly the three methods are used. They are phone, they are email, and they are web-based. And web-based is the most effective or the most used one by most of these organizations because it's easier for someone to go over the internet and report compared when I'm gonna call, they will know my phone number, They will know my voice. Maybe the transaction, the call is recorded for quality purposes. So many individuals are afraid. Again, it depends on the culture. But what are the issues that we are afraid from? The issue that we are afraid from that someone will go and report directly to their supervisors. And this is what we discover in most of the cases, 29% of the cases, fraudsters are doing fraud. An employee will discover the fraud, and he, rather than reporting the fraudsters or the fraud to the hotline, they are reporting it to their direct supervisors. And maybe their direct supervisors are involved. Maybe their direct supervisors, they will inform the fraudster. So this is why we don't want our staff to report it to their direct supervisor. We need them to report it to who? To report it to the hotline. We need them to report it to the proper channel inside our organization, the whistleblowing line. Or some organization, they say, you need to report it to internal audit, or you need to report it to the investigation team, or you need to report it to compliance, or you need to report it to HR. So whatever the right channel inside your organization that you decide, you need to make sure employees are aware about this channel and they are reporting it to the right channel. It's not a good idea for them to report the fraud directly to their supervisors. Now, when we are speaking about how effective our controls inside our organization to catch fraud, we need to understand the difference between what we call passive control, where we are discovering fraud after it happened and we are dealing with it, compared to active control, where we are discovering fraud at early stages, or we are discovering fraud before even started. So when we are looking at the different most effective method of catching fraud, we need to see at the different one. Is it active, or is it potentially active or passive, or is it, actually passive? So we say tip is in between. Tip, fraud happened and someone reported fraud. So we are taking a proactive measure immediately after the fraud happened because someone reported. But what we can do document examination, we can do internal audit, we can do account reconciliation, we can do automated transaction monitoring and surveillance and monitoring to be able to catch fraud at early stages, when fraud is about to happen or fraud is happening. And this is where our organization should invest more in active controls rather than passive controls. Because passive controls will allow us to uncover fraud, but the issue is the fraud will be uncovered after a huge duration, and the cost will be massive to our organization. The losses will be large. So we need to think about how can we think about having the right balance between preventive control and deductive control to be able to catch fraud at early stages and reduce the amount of losses that our organization will suffer from. Now, let's speak about the victim organizations. These victim organizations, what type of fraud happen in them? If we look at different industries, look, we can see here, banking, we can see manufacturing, we can see healthcare, energy, retail, construction, education. In most of these industries, we can see the number one fraud that happen most often inside this organization, if we can see, is corruption. Corruption is the most often one. It's happening most of the time. So we can see corruption, it's really happening in most of these organizations, but also not only corruption, we can see something related to billing, something related to non-cash assets. These are the most common schemes that happen in different industries. So for us as a fraud examiners, when we are looking at the organization to uncover the type of fraud that can happen, these are the high risk area from frequency where we need to look at. And not only in one industry, in all the industries. So this is what we need to focus on also as an internal auditors. When we are auditing the organization, we need to understand that billing from a fraud disbursement standpoint is the highest area where fraud can happen. We're not speaking about the amount, we are speaking about the frequency. There are so many bills the organization they have to pay, and in that way there are so much fraud can happen in that area. Now let's speak about conducting background check. Conducting background check against our employees when we hire them is a very important step. Why? No organization would like to hire unethical employees, right? Fraudsters. Because this is what happened in banks. In banks, they do very massive background check on their employees. Why? To ensure their employees are actually not working for the mafia, to allow the mafia to launder the money inside the bank. So we asked the organization, are you doing background check? And we discovered that 57% of organizations are doing background check before hiring their employees. Now, are these background checks effective or not? When they ask about if they are effective or not, they discover 16% of them, they uncover information about these individuals related to their background, related to their criminal history, to their previous employment, and in that way we didn't hire them. But in 84% of them, they said they didn't reveal any bad information about them. And why this is happening? Because so many organizations, they are not doing intensive background check. They are doing just simple background check. And this is when we ask organization what type of background check you are doing against the employees. Some of them, they say we are doing employment history. We are just calling previous employer. Or we are not doing any background check on them. Or we are doing criminal check. Or we are doing educational verification to verify that these employees, they have the proper certifications. Now think about your organization. When is the last time HR, before hiring an employee, verified that their degrees are accurate, their certificates are accurate, their history is accurate? This is very important to ensure you as a hospital, you are not hiring doctors and these doctors are actually, they don't have medical degree. You as a university, you are not hiring professors to work for you and they don't have the proper credentials. Also, reference check is very important. You need to call individuals who these individuals worked with before to be able to verify that they are correct. And credit check, because we need to do background check on our employees, not only at the time we hire them, but we need to do it every year after that. One of the things we have to do on a regular basis, which is a credit check. This is, for example, in the police. If you work in the police, they will run credit check on you on a regular basis to make sure. Do you have any issue with your credit? Are you facing any financial difficulty? Because if you are a police officer and you are facing financial difficulty, or if you are a bank officer and you are facing financial difficulty, you will have a low credit score. Most likely in that case, you need to fix it. So maybe you will do fraud, maybe you'll do corruption. So this is the issue we need to look at. But also at the same time, some countries, they will do drug testing to make sure that you are not consuming any types of drugs, especially if you are working in a sensitive position inside our organization. So background check is a very important aspect, need to be done, and they need to do multiple background check to make sure they uncover any employees who are not suitable to work inside our organization based on their background. Now, let's speak about the anti-fraud controls that organizations need to be implemented to make sure that they control fraud inside our organization. They discover there are so many controls we can implement, but which one is implemented most frequently? They discover code of conduct is considered number one. They say the best way to control fraud inside our organization is not like by just implementing the controls and policy and procedures. No, it's about implementing the code of conduct and communicate it effectively to our employees. Why? Because they say culture can eat strategy for breakfast. So if you don't have the proper culture, if you don't have the proper ethics, if you don't have the proper code of conduct, employees are going to do whatever they want. This is why it's very important for us to make sure we have the code of conduct and we communicate it effectively to our organization, staff, employees, vendors, customers, so all of them, they follow. And I can see this happening more often. So many organizations that they are moving towards implementing controls related to fraud, they contact me and they say, yeah, the first step we need to do is we need to implement code of conduct and we need to communicate it effectively to our employees. So in that way, our employees, they understand what they should do, what they should not do, which consider corruption, fraud, and ethical behavior, non-compliance. And in that way, we will try to create awareness so they understand what they should do and what they should not do. This is the best thing, what we call control environment, the culture. After that, they say we need to make sure we have external auditors. We have internal auditors doing their job to audit this function to ensure fraud is not happening. Also, management review is very important. Management should go and examine the documents. They should review to make sure everything is done properly. And we need to have effective hotline. We need to have effective audit committee, training related to fraud, anti-fraud policy. All of them are important. And finally, one of the things that so many organizations they are focusing on today, having effective support program. We need to reduce pressure inside our organization. Why? In most of the cases, pressure is causing fraud to happen. So when we reduce pressure by having effective program to make sure employees feel comfortable, make sure any employees who are suffering from health issues, social issues, psychological issues are treated, that will reduce fraud. Why? Because they discover depression can cause fraud to happen. If someone is depressed, they are going to come to your organization and they are going to steal money. Why? Because money can cure everything. So this is where they are trying to have effective employee support program to reduce the amount of stress and pressure employees are suffering from. Now, let's speak about how can we make sure that we implement effective internal control inside our organization. They say, what are the primary internal control weaknesses that are contributing to the fraud? So what do you think? You can write in the chat, what do you think are the primary controls that causing fraud to happen inside our organization? Think about it. Is it, for example, the collusion by management? Or is it, for example, the lack of management review? Or is it, for example, overriding the system? Well, they discover number one, the main reason why fraud is happening inside our organization is very simple: lack of internal control. If we don't have internal control, fraud will happen. If you have an operation and you don't implement effective internal control over the operation, anyone will take advantage of it. There is an opportunity. But also discover, if we have effective internal control, what management they will do? They override existing system. If management, they have super user, they can override the system, or they can have collusion. They work together to override the system. Or sometimes the lack of management review. We have internal control is working effectively, but no one reviewing the report generated by this internal control. So if management is not reviewing the report, the effectiveness of this control will not be there. Also, sometimes is the lack of competent individuals who are doing their job. They don't know exactly what they are doing, so in that way anyone can trick them. Or sometimes we don't have the proper tone at the top, or the lack of independent check and audit. So in that way, so many contributing factors that can lead to fraud, but the most important one is lack of internal control. If you don't have effective internal control, if you don't have internal control from the beginning, fraud will happen. Now let's speak about very interesting topic, which is these are the fraudsters, the white collar crimes, the guys who are doing the fraud. We need to understand their profiles. We need to understand what type of fraud they are doing, where they are inside our organization, what kind of background they have, for how many years they work inside the organization, what kind of fraud they are doing inside our organization. So we can see a very interesting, that the fraud that's happening inside our organization is happening in so many divisions. But mainly, where is the fraud happening? 14% of the cases is in the operation, is where management, they are working, right? Or in accounting department, where they are having all these financial reports, where they have all these financial numbers. It can be in sales. 12% is related to sales. These sales staff, they are overstating the revenue. They are manipulating the account receivables, and in customer service and in executive upper management. So these are the different types of department that fraud are happening in. But the question here, which type of fraud is happening in this department? If we need to understand which type of fraud happening in each department, we need to look at the report to show what type of fraud is happening based on what? Based on the impact and likelihood. Which one of these fraud is high frequency, is happening more frequent, and which one is having the highest impact? We discover, which is very interesting, that the highest risk in our organization related to fraud in our operation is done by the upper management, done by the executive management. Also, from frequency standpoint is board of directors. From impact standpoint is board of directors. Board of directors, they can make very huge impact based on a decision they make. For example, in one organization, board of directors, they decide to play with their compensation. So they played with their compensation, and they were able to steal from the organization based on the compensation they receive. So, and the compensation they receive, they are massive, huge amount. Or in another case, in a Japanese company, board of directors, they manipulated the transaction to be able to benefit themselves. They created the shell company, and they make the organization do business with the shell company, and they made money out of it because they decided exactly how the business will be run. So board of directors can have maximum impact, huge impact. But when we look at the other types of fraud that's happening more frequently, where we can see it's in the accounting, it's in the operation, in the sales, in the customer service, like we mentioned. So here we look at the impact and the likelihood to see exactly where it's happening in different sections and where this fraud is going on. But when we want to understand exactly what type of fraud is happening in these divisions, we can see we have operation, accounting, sales, customer service. The most common fraud that's happening, again, we'll go back to corruption. Corruption is the most common type of fraud happening in most of them. Someone from the inside, someone from the outside, they are working together to do fraud. Two individuals inside the organization in two different departments, one in accounting, one in operation, one in sales, they are working together to do the fraud, collusion. But we can see also in different divisions, billing can be one of the types of fraud, where fraud is happening. In different divisions, like for example in accounting, we can see check and payment tampering is also one of the areas where fraud will happen. So we need to go back for us as an auditor, as a fraud examiners, and look at the organization. Conduct a fraud risk assessment to identify where inside our organization is the highest level of risk related to fraud, and which one is more frequent based on our operation as an organization. Because think about it, every organization is different. If you are speaking about Carrefour, retail, the types of fraud that can happen in each one of these divisions are different compared when you speak with a bank. So this is why it's very important for us to understand the different types of fraud that happen in different divisions and the different type of schemes related to fraud that can happen there. Now, let's speak about the level of authority. Let's profile the fraudster. Who are these fraudsters who are doing fraud in our organization? Yes, everyone agrees. Our employees are doing massive fraud. Our managers are doing massive fraud. So we discover most of the fraud inside our organization done by our employees, done by our managers. And only 19% done by the owners and executives. So in that way, we say, oh, so most of the fraud is done by these low-level employees and by the mid-management. Yes, that's correct. But when we should not only look at the frequency, we should not look at which one is most common. We need to look as well as the impact. Because when employee will steal, they steal a little bit. When managers they steal double than the employees. But when executives they steal, when owners they steal more than 10 times. Not only the executive, their salary 10 times more than the employee, also when they are doing fraud, they are stealing 10 times more than the employees. So they are stealing in small cases, but the amount they are stealing is massive. So we need to focus on these big cases for these owners and executives. And why they have the ability to do that? Because they have the authority, they have the power, they have the capability to be able to do that fraud inside the organization because they are at higher level, and at the same time they have higher access to resources. Now, when we look at these employees and managers and owners, for how long they are doing the fraud before we discover them. For employees, less than 1 year, we discover they are doing fraud. For managers, around less than 2 years. But when we speak about owners and executives, it took us sometimes more than 2 years to uncover their fraud. Why? Because they are in control. They make sure that they hide their fraud effectively. So this is why we need to look at not only the impact that they have, but also at the duration that it took for us to uncover their fraud. Now, when we look at how long the employees that they did fraud inside our organization worked, we can see when someone working around a year, he will do small fraud. When someone worked between 1 year to 5 years, he will do double. But when someone worked more than 6 years, he is doing triple. When someone working more than 10 years, he is doing 5 times, 10 times. So we can see the longer the employee worked inside our organization, he will understand the controls, the operation, the schemes, understand the gaps, and he will be able to take advantage of it. So this is why when someone is working for 20 years in our organization and we trust him, be careful. This guy, he is expert in your operation, and he most likely able to do fraud in case there are opportunities or gaps. So we need to monitor them the same way we monitor the new employees we hire, because they have more capability, and if they will do fraud, the amount of losses are going to be much higher. So now let's speak about gender. When we are speaking about the different type of fraud that happen all over the world, we can see that in most of the cases, 74% of the cases happen by male, compared to only 25% of cases happen by female. Now we need to understand not only the number of cases, but also fraud that happen usually by male is around more than 50% than the fraud in the amount that happened by female. And someone will wonder, what's the reason? One of the main reasons that usually female inside our organization compared to male, they don't have the same position. Usually male, they are in a higher position in so many organizations. They have more power, they have more access to resources. And at the same time, when male is stealing, they are so many times stealing for themselves and for their family, or they like to steal more money compared to females. Sometimes when they are stealing inside the organization, they don't have that higher level of authority to be able to do massive amount of fraud, and at the same time, they are stealing for themselves. This is some of the explanation that we can see about that. But when we are looking at the fraudsters and we are looking at their age, what is the impact related to the age with the fraud? We can see when someone is starting inside the organization, he's less than 26 years old, he's stealing a little bit, and the amount is a little bit. When he is more, 26 to 30, he's stealing more and the amount is more. When he is more than 40, what will happen? He will steal more and the amount will increase. But once he is more than 46, he will steal less, but the amount will increase. When he is more than 60, he will steal only a little bit, but the amount is massive. Why? Because he's been doing this for the last 30 years. He got experience in doing fraud. So he can do small amount of fraud, but the amount of money that he will steal is massive. So this is where we need to see when someone working inside our organization and he is more than 50, 60, we think, okay, well, this person may not do fraud. You need to understand that this person, because of his experience, capability, maybe his authority, maybe his number of years he worked inside our organization, when he will do fraud, the amount of damage will be massive. Now let's speak about and understand exactly what kind of education the person will have when he's doing fraud. When someone is doing fraud and got high school, he will do small amount of fraud because he's not so much smart. When he got some kind of university degree, he will do more fraud and the amount is higher. But when he got a master degree, when he got PhD, he is super smart. So these guys who are super smart, they will do small cases of fraud, but the damage, the amount is huge. So we need to understand the smartest an individual working inside your organization, the more he got the capability, the understanding, the knowledge for him to do fraud. So in that way, you need to have additional monitoring on him and make sure you are examining his work. Now let's look at exactly how many cases of fraud involved more than one individual. They say when someone is doing fraud alone, one person is doing fraud, he will steal a little bit money. When two individuals are doing fraud, the amount will double. But the interesting, when 3 or more are involved in the fraud, the amount will go to 5 times, 10 times. And we can see today most of the cases of fraud that happening in so many large organizations, they have a group of individuals. Like we can see in a bank in Saudi Arabia, when they were doing money laundering, 32 individuals, they are working together to do money laundering for 3 billion. We can see another case of fraud and corruption happen in UAE when they did the fraud around more than 1 billion. How they were able to do this fraud? They have 7 individuals working together, 28 individuals working together in the same bank for them to do the fraud. So we can see today fraud is not done anymore by one individual. It's done by collusion, different individuals working together for them to do the fraud. And once different individuals working together, they can circumvent our control, they can override our system, and that way it's so difficult for us to catch them. So this is why we need to make sure we have the proper controls, and not only make sure the controls are working, also make sure we have segregation of duties and we have monitoring over different divisions to make sure no one will overcome or override our controls. Now let's speak about the key warning indicators of someone doing fraud inside our organization. What we need to look for from HR's perspective: compliance, internal audit, fraud examination, to see if we see this red flag, maybe we need to go and examine and see if there is any fraud happening. They say the first indicator is someone living beyond their means. Someone is spending more than they can afford. They discover a big fraud case here in UAE where someone came to the organization driving a very expensive car and his salary is only 14,000 dirham. Everyone asks how he can afford a car more than $500,000 if his salary is so little. So living beyond their means is one of the indicators that can help us uncovering fraud cases. Also, financial difficulties. Someone got financial difficulties, got so many loans, so many expenses. This is one of the indications that we need to look at. Unusual close relationship with the vendors or customer. Someone we can see on social media, he is going on a personal trip, fishing trip with the vendor. Someone on social media, he is going and having very close relationship with the customer. This is an indication, maybe in case there is a business dealing between this customer and this vendor and our organization, that maybe there is a case of corruption here or conflict of interest. Also, we can look at someone who is unwilling to share responsibility. He is not allowing anyone to do his job. He's not allowing anyone to check on his job. This is an indicator maybe he is hiding something. But other indicators we need to look at also, if someone is always defensive, if someone always irritated, he doesn't want to communicate, he doesn't want to give you information, this is an indication something is going on, why he's acting this way. Or if someone is a wheeler dealer. This is the person in our organization who's always manipulating the system, always cheating, always acting in a way it looks not proper. He's always manipulating the control. By him doing this, this is an indication that in case he's in a position of power or authority, he may do fraud. Or someone who's always trying to intimidate individuals, trying to bully individuals inside our organization, trying always to hide what he is doing. And finally, if someone got any financial, any family problems, any divorce or social problems, they discover individuals who are depressed because of divorce, family problems, most likely will come to the organization and they steal money. Now, when we look at these indicators, we need to understand which one of these indicators is the highest amount of fraud that can lead to. So we can see if we have inside our organization pressure considered the most important factor that will cause individuals to do fraud. Especially someone who's handling financial reports, and the financial reports showing we have losses. What can we do? We are under so much pressure, we need to achieve profit, so maybe we manipulate our financial reports. So they discover the most damage that our organization will suffer from is from individuals who are under pressure because they are going to do massive amount of fraud. Also, if someone got past legal problems, he got illegal issues and he's trying to cover these illegal issues by manipulating the report. Especially today, we are living in a sustainability economy. So if someone discovers that our organization is not meeting the sustainability goals, and that's going to cause a legal issue to us, how can we manipulate that? Or it can be someone who got wheeler-dealer attitude. He's always trying to manipulate the system. This guy is going to do whatever possible for him to take advantage of our system. Or someone who is always intimidating and bullying everyone. So these kind of red flags, if we notice them on individuals, they are under pressure, or they have legal problems, or they have wheeler-dealer attitude, we can see that they are going to cause massive impact on our organization from fraud standpoint. Now let's differentiate the fraud that will happen between female and male compared to the red flags. So what are the red flags that a female will show related to the fraud they do? They say they are similar to the male, but they are a little bit living beyond their means. They go buy expensive bags, they go buy expensive suits, they go buy expensive jewelries, they go buy expensive cars. Or they will have financial difficulty. It looks like they have so many expenses, so many loans they have to pay. Or they have family issues, they have divorce and marriage problems. Compared to female, when we look at what are the main red flags, we can see they have a close relationship with a vendor. They have a close relationship with a customer. Or they have the wheeler-dealer attitude. They are always trying to manipulate the system. Or they are always defensive. They are always irritated. They are always angry. So these are the indications that we need to look at compared to male, compared to female, when we are looking at the behavioral red flag related to fraud. Now let's understand for perpetrators who are doing schemes related to corruption, what kind of red flags they are having when they are doing this kind of corruption. We can see that the most frequent red flag that we can see that someone have unusual close relationship with a vendor or customer. Because if this person is very close with the vendor and customer, most likely there is a conflict of interest, there's a personal relationship that's gonna make him benefit the vendor and the customer against our organization. So this is the main red flag we need to look at. But if we are speaking about someone who is actually doing financial statement fraud, manipulating our financial numbers, what do you think? What do you think the main red flag that we need to notice on his behavior? You can write on the chat, you can write in the comment. What do you think the main red flag? Is it he is having financial difficulty? Is it he is under so much pressure? Is it he is trying to meet the target? The answer is yes. These are all the factors. When someone under massive amount of pressure to be able to perform, to show the organization is meeting their target, to show that he can meet his financial obligation, to show he can meet the analyst expectations. This is the main reason why someone manipulates the financial statements. This is why our executives, senior management, financial professionals should not be under so much pressure to meet the target, otherwise they are going to do most likely fraud. So when we see pressure, this is one of the indicators that maybe these individuals, they are going to do whatever possible to achieve the goals. Now let's speak about punishment. What are the punishment that most of organizations are doing against individuals who are doing fraud? If someone discovered inside the organization that he's doing fraud, and then the investigation department took the issue to the legal department, what the legal department is doing against these individuals? They discovered that the most frequent action taken against fraudsters is actually what? Is actually termination. Termination, 67% of the cases, fraudsters, they end up with termination. Some of them, they have suspension or probation. Some of them, they actually no longer work inside the organization after we discover the fraud cases. Some of them, we allow them to remain inside our organization, or we ask them to resign. And some of them, they actually settled and they paid the amount of fraud they did, and then maybe they stayed or they left. So we can see in most of the cases, if a fraudster is doing fraud in our organization, we are not going to keep him. He is going to continue doing fraud, or maybe he's in the future going to motivate other employees to do fraud. So in most of the cases, in organization decided to terminate him. But the question here, organization only terminated his services, and did they take any legal action against him or not? So did we do any internal punishment against him other than termination? They discover an organization most likely terminated individuals who are what? Who are employees, who are managers compared to the owners and executives. Why? If a senior individual is doing fraud or corruption, the organization, they are afraid that this is very important executive in our organization, and we are afraid if we terminate him, we are going to lose massive benefit that we are getting from him. So most likely, staff level or management, they are the employees that are terminated. But high level executive, they are not so much terminated. But at the same time, when we look at the amount of punishment that received against these individuals, we can see that the owners and executive are the least likely to be punished in any type of punishment, not only termination. Most likely, we punish who? We punish most of the likely what? Most likely, we punish the employees. Most likely, we punish the managers. But owners and executive are least likely to be punished for cases of fraud. So they don't receive so much punishment compared to our employees and our managers. So the question here, why executives, they are taking this privilege? Because they are at a higher level inside the organization. They are maybe having a higher ability to negotiate inside the organization. So they are least likely to be punished inside the organization. And at the same time, when we are terminating employees or managers, executive and owners, they are less likely to be terminated. We can find a way for us to settle the situation and move forward. But this is an interesting research to show you exactly what's happening with these individuals who we discover they are doing fraud inside our organization. Even if we terminate them, are we taking any legal action against them? They discover 57% of the cases they will end up with criminal referral. Meaning we don't only terminate the person from our organization, but we decide to take a legal case against these individuals. And most of the time, we took legal case against individuals when the amount is large. So you can see most of the time when the amount is large, we are taking legal case against them. When the amount is low, we are only terminating them. And this is very common, especially in Middle East. In Middle East, if someone inside the bank is doing fraud and the amount is small, they are terminating the person, but they are not taking legal action because legal action is going to be very expensive. But if the amount is large, they are taking legal action. And this is why employees inside the banks or any organization, they say, let's not steal so much money. So in case something will happen, they will terminate us and they will find a way to get the money back, but they are most likely not going to take legal action against us. And this is what happens usually. But when we are looking at these cases that they have taken legal action against the individuals, are they successful or not? They say 72% there is a success rate of these cases where individuals at the end, they plead guilty. So in that way, we can see some of them are pleaded guilty or some of them convinced at the trial that they are doing the fraud. And this is why it's very important for our organization, in case fraudsters are doing fraud, not only to terminate them, not only to take the proper punishment against them, not only to recover the assets, but also is important for us to refer them to the legal department for them to take a criminal case against them or civil case against them. It depends on the case, for us to send a signal inside our organization that not only the punishment is going to happen against individuals who are doing fraud, but at the same time, we are going to take the proper legal action against them to make them go to prison or to pay the fine or the damages to our organization. Now, it's very interesting. So many organizations also, they decided not to take. Remember, only 57, they took criminal cases against individuals. Why the rest they decided not to take? Why they decided, even the person did fraud, they decided not to do anything. They just called the executive, say, listen, we are going to terminate this person. We are not going to take any action against them. They say one of the reasons is because they are afraid from publicity. 34% of the companies, they say they are afraid that if they take a legal case against the person, now it's going to be in the media, the publicity, the reputation of the organization. Some of them, they have private settlements. They say, listen, as long as you return the money to us, we are going to actually not take any legal case against you. And the fraudsters return the money and the case closed. But the interesting thing, around 50%, because they have internal disciplinary action. They took internal action against the person and they say this is more than enough. We don't want to actually take any action legally against the person. Which is, if they will do this, they will send the signal inside the organization that if the only thing that will happen to individual who's doing fraud, they will get internal compliance action against them. So someone else will say, I will do fraud as well. So this is not a good way to send a message inside the organization that fraudsters are not going to be punished. We need to take the proper punishment against this fraudster by termination, by taking proper legal action, by following our fraud and compliance rules to make sure that we are going after the fraudsters inside our organization. Now let's speak about the success of this organization in recovering the assets. This is a very important topic because so many organizations, fraud will happen. They do the investigation, they spend 3 months on this investigation, they uncover the fraud, they catch the fraudsters. But the question here, can they recover the money from the fraud? This is the most important question that board of directors and management and the owners are asking. Someone did 10 million fraud. After you did the investigation for 3 months, can we recover the money or the money is gone? So now what do you think? You can write in the chat or in the comment. What do you think the percentage of money that organizations they are able to recover from fraudsters? Is it 40%? Is it 70%? Is it 20%? Well, it's very interesting. Only 13% they have full recovery. They recovered all the losses. Imagine 57% they recovered nothing, and 30% they were able to recover a portion of it. So we can see recovering, the money from the fraudster is a very important aspect when we are conducting investigation. Because at the end of the day, what is the benefit of uncovering the fraud, catching the fraudster, figuring out their schemes, and at the end of the day, we can't recover the money. Even if we take legal action, the person already spent the money, or the money gone, or he was able to hide the money in offshore country. So in that way, there is no way for us to get this money back. So we need to think before starting any investigation, what are the proper way for us to recover the money after this case is resolved? What can we do to make sure that this money will be returned back to the organization? And in so many organizations, returning the money is more important than taking legal action against the person. Because if the person will go to prison or not, if the person will face fine or not, or he had legal violation, is not going to help us compared to recovering the $10 million that we lost related to fraud. So recovering the money is a very important aspect. We need to look at it when we are dealing with cases related to fraud. Now, we spent around 1 hour with you to give you an overview of all the main findings of Occupational Fraud 2024, a report to the nations that published by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. And I highly recommend you that you go to acfe.com and download this report. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners is considered the largest anti-fraud association in the world that have more than 90,000 members all over the world. And if you would like to work in any domain related to fighting fraud, if you are in internal audit, in compliance, in internal control, in fraud examination, in investigation, I highly recommend you to join the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. I've been working with the ACFE as ACFE authorized trainer for the last 10 years, and I'm teaching with them the CPE Certificate, which is the golden standard related to fraud examination. So I highly recommend anyone who is interested in becoming certified fraud examiner, you can reach out to me. You can visit our website, openthinking.ae, and we can help you prepare for the CFE exam and pass the exam within 4 weeks, virtually or face-to-face within 4 days. We already have been teaching this certificate with the ACFE over the last 10 years. We conducted more than 80 CFE exam review courses, and we have more than 3,500 delegates who passed the CFE exam with us. I wish you the best in your journey to fight fraud, and I hope that you enjoyed our session here to give you an overview of the key findings related to fraud, related to occupational fraud in 2024. I recommend you to subscribe in my channel to be able to get additional videos and additional resources, and soon we are going to be having additional training programs in my channel. So subscribe to my channel, hit the bell to get all the notification, and thank you so much for joining. Have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.